Hey, it's Eric from DeHaven Camera, and today we'll go over some tips and tricks when using a Tilta Nucleus follow focus system. One of the biggest things that we've seen often is that we hear the Nucleus motors tend to skip or spin off the rods. One of the easiest ways to fix that is to use stainless steel rods over aluminum. So aluminum rods tend to wear down and don't give enough bite on the bottom of the motor, and that allows these motors to slip really easily. Another little tip is that on the clamps that come with the Nucleus, there are two little adapters to go from 19 to 15 mil. These little inserts are quite loose and they're spinning around on your clamp. So what happens is they tend to sit here at the bottom of the rod. Well, what happens is once we put this on, we can see that this causes a small rod like the aluminum ones that are maybe quite worn to want to pop off or slide off and not have a lot of bite area. So you can take these two pieces out, and we see that the side with the two serrations, we bend that in just a little bit. Just put a little pressure or push it on the table and bend those inward. When you slide them back on to the clamp, they don't slide around, so they kind of stay in place. And then we'll adjust these so that the clamp inserts are on either side of the rod. And that allows for better biting force or better clamping force from the clamp onto the rod, so we have less of that slippage. The other thing is about putting motors in the correct position. So another thing that we'll see a lot is having a motor set up this way. As you can see here, the clamp is all the way at the very bottom of the motor, and the gear is way up here at the top above the center line of the lens. Now, the reason why that's a problem is it's creating leverage for the motor to want to drive off of the lens. So if we rotate this lens downward, when it goes this direction, the motor's fine. It's going to want to drive under the lens. But because it's above the center line, as we turn this way, we can see that it just pops the motor right off because the leverage wants to drive this motor away from the lens. So what we recommend is to always try to put the motor or the gear below the center line of the lens. So what we like to do is flip this the other way. So that the clamp is down below or the knob is below, so it's easier to get to. And I'm going to top mount this one for now on our stainless steel rod. So I'm going to slide this motor on, and then I'm going to move this all the way to the point where we can see here that the motor is sitting above the center line of the lens, as tucked into the lens as possible. And then I'm just going to tighten this, not super tight, just a couple of finger turns. Now, what this allows it to do is that no matter which direction I'm moving, the motor doesn't have a lot of leverage to want to slide off the lens. So now with just a little bit of finger tight here, no matter how hard I push, this motor is not going to come off or slide off the lens. On a stainless steel rod, it also has more bite because, again, less wear and a little bit, and two different materials. So this right here will save most of your skipping problems or your lens, the gear not engaging on the lens problem. So mounting it like this, if we're going to mount it on the bottom, we're going to tuck this motor up, and again, just a little bit of finger tight. I have the pivot point as close to the gear as possible, and I'm not interfering with my dovetail, so I can still move my camera and get it off without having to readjust the motor. Now we have a motor that's sitting neatly under the lens and doesn't want to pop off. What we also see a lot of is people complaining that the motor twitches or that it will just run on its own. And one of the things that we notice as we power this up here is a lot of people are running the Nucleuses in high power mode. So that would be in the H or the H on the motor. Now, high power mode, when you're standing right next to the motor, causes a lot of interference. And we'll notice that when that happens, you'll see some twitching like this on the lens. What we recommend doing is if you're in the same room as the camera, running it in medium mode. If you're standing right next to the camera like I am now, running it in low. And if you're in a room-to-room situation or maybe car-to-car, running it in high power mode. As well, you can always try changing channels to get away from some of your other transmission devices, such as a camera with Wi-Fi or a video transmitter that's mounted close by. So by changing channels, you can move away from some of that interference. So one of the last problems we've heard of is people running into an issue where the motor doesn't feel connected to the knob. So maybe you'll have just a very short amount of range, Or what we'll see sometimes is when you start to turn the knob, the motor will actually spin all the way back like it's going back to zero. So like there's a disconnect between the calibration. And that can happen, and we've noticed this can happen sometimes when you have a lot of skipping and recalibrating. The data coming from the motor to the hand unit sort of gets out of sync. And what we found the fix for that is just doing a reset or a restore on both your hand unit and your motor. So we'll go into the menu system, we'll hit restore, we'll go into the menu system on the hand unit, hit restore. That generally solves that problem. And anytime you're running into configuration issues or you're running into these skipping or it not feeling connected, just do a system restore. That'll get you back to a good starting point, and then you can work back from there. The last thing is running too high or too low of a torque. So on a lot of lenses like these Cooke S4s, we can run this motor in very low torque mode. That's going to give you really good feedback and really good connection from the operator to the lens. If we're running too high a torque, we can actually damage the hard stops on the lens. This is especially important on cinemodded lens or still lenses where we're using gears that have been mounted to them. We want to run those in as low a torque as possible to move the lens without it lagging or falling behind. So you can set that torque setting depending on the lens and the situation you're using. So to recap, running in steel rods will always help, or 19 mil rods makes a big difference in that skipping problem. So steel or 19 mil. Making the adjustment to the clamps so that the inserts, if you're using them on 15 mil, are on either side and not all at the top or all at the bottom. Mounting the motor in the correct position, so the motor gear below the center line of the lens and as tucked up underneath the lens as possible without a lot of leverage. And then setting the torque and setting your channel and power, transmission power, to the correct settings. So hopefully that helps you set up your nucleus for a trouble-free shoot.